The studio lights blazed white-hot, the kind of brilliance that makes every twitch of the face, every flicker of the eyes, impossible to hide. Cameras zoomed in, red tally lights glowing like watchful eyes, beaming the moment to millions. The room had been humming with that strange tension unique to live broadcasts, where the air feels heavier, almost electric, as if everyone knows something unpredictable is about to happen. And then it came. The villain leaned forward, lips curling in a smirk that carried the weight of entitlement. With deliberate sharpness, the words were thrown like daggers, a cruel swipe at the hero's character, their background, their very right to stand at that table. It wasn't just an insult, it was a dismissal, a way of saying, "You don't belong here." The studio audience gasped audibly, a collective intake of breath that echoed louder than applause ever could. Even the moderators froze, their faces briefly betraying the realization that this had crossed into dangerous, unforgettable territory. For a heartbeat, silence owned the room. The villain's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Savoring the sting of the words, they leaned back, confident the strike had landed, confident the crowd would bend under the force of arrogance. But what lingered in the air wasn't victory, it was shock, mingled with something deeper, more volatile, outrage. Cameras cut to the hero, face illuminated, posture unwavering. Their calm contrasted so violently with the venom that had just been unleashed that the contrast itself felt cinematic, like a wide shot before the storm. The villain waited for a flinch, for defensiveness, for a stumble. Instead, there was only silence. Steady, deliberate, unnerving silence. The audience could feel it. A shift, imperceptible but undeniable, like the soundless crack before thunder. Something was coming, something more powerful than insult or ego. The villain had thrown the first stone, but in doing so, they had lit the fuse of a moment that would be replayed, dissected, and immortalized. And as the camera lingered on the hero's steady gaze, the nation held its breath. No one in that studio, no one watching from home, could have guessed what was about to unfold. No one expected the reply that would change everything. This wasn't just another exchange on live television. It wasn't just two public figures clashing under the glare of the studio lights. What had exploded in that room carried with it the weight of a much larger struggle, one that had been simmering across the country for years. It was the battle between arrogance and dignity, exclusion and belonging, fear and hope. And the stakes were far greater than a single insult. America at that moment was raw, divided, and weary. Families had endured years of rhetoric that questioned who counted as real Americans. Immigrants were painted as threats instead of contributors. Identity itself, race, gender, heritage, had become a weapon in political discourse. People tuned into debates not just to hear about policy, but to see themselves defended or denied. Every word spoken on that stage had the power to validate millions or to strip away their sense of worth. The villain's insult was not heard in isolation. To some, it was a reminder of playground taunts that never truly ended. To others, it was the echo of laws and speeches that had for decades drawn lines between insiders and outsiders. That single remark embodied an entire worldview, that power is reserved for the few and everyone else is an intruder. It wasn't just an attack on the hero. It was an attack on anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. And that was why the room reacted the way it did. That gasp from the audience wasn't mere shock, it was recognition. It was the sudden, sharp memory of personal battles, of cultural bruises, of the times dignity had been stripped away by someone who thought cruelty equaled strength. Viewers at home felt it too. Social feeds lit up with instant reactions. Screenshots, transcripts, outrage, all spreading before the hero had even uttered a single word in response. But here is where the stakes rose even higher. The hero wasn't just a name on a ballot or a face at a desk. They carried with them a story woven from sacrifice, service, and survival. To millions, they symbolized the possibility of America becoming the country it always promised to be. This was bigger than a clash of personalities. It was a collision of values. Would arrogance continue to define the national stage? Or could dignity, calm, and truth carve out space in an environment designed to reward noise and cruelty? In moments like these, history has a way of crystallizing. A single sentence, a single comeback, can tilt the narrative of an entire season, sometimes even an era. And the villain, intoxicated by their own performance, had no idea that their words had set the stage for precisely such a turning point. The camera stayed tight, the silence stretched longer than usual, and the tension was unbearable. This wasn't just television, it was theater of the American soul. And as the exchange escalated, the entire nation leaned closer to their screens, waiting for the moment that would decide who truly held the upper hand. Long before the cameras turned toward this clash, the antagonist had already built a reputation crafted on bravado, sharpened by controversy, and fueled by the belief that arrogance could be mistaken for strength. To their supporters, they were bold, unfiltered, and unafraid to say what others wouldn't. But to those who saw more clearly, that very unfiltered nature revealed not courage, but contempt. The villain thrived on hostility, shaping a career not around solutions or service, but around spectacle. Their rise was meteoric, at least on the surface. Television appearances, sound bites, engineered to shock, carefully staged outbursts that made headlines, all of it gave the illusion of authenticity. They branded themselves as the voice of the people, but their record told a different story. Again and again, they aligned with policies that favored power over fairness, exclusion over inclusion. They attacked programs that lifted the marginalized, dismissed the struggles of working families, and sneered at the idea of diversity as strength. But what truly defined them wasn't ideology, it was the performance of arrogance. Every debate became a stage for mockery. Every opponent was cast as weak, soft, or illegitimate. They interrupted, they smirked, they turned serious discussions into arenas for ridicule. It was never about facts or solutions. It was about dominance. To them, winning wasn't about persuading, it was about humiliating. The contradictions, however, were impossible to ignore. They railed against elites while moving comfortably in elite circles. They spoke of family values while their own history was littered with scandals whispered about in hallways and splashed across tabloids. They positioned themselves as defenders of ordinary people, yet showed little patience for the lives of those outside their own privileged bubble. Hypocrisy wasn't an accident in their career, it was the fuel that powered it. And yet, they were formidable. Their ability to command attention, to manipulate headlines, to dominate airwaves, was undeniable. They knew how to weaponize outrage, how to turn even their blunders into talking points. Where others stumbled, they spun. Where others apologized, they doubled down. For years, that tactic worked. Opponents were left chasing after their provocations, always a step behind, always reacting. The villain thrived in chaos, and the more the environment rewarded sound bites over substance, the stronger they seemed to become. Still, those who had watched closely knew the cracks had always been there. Moments when their temper betrayed them, instances when their mask of confidence slipped into insecurity, episodes when the laughter of the crowd was not with them, but at them. These fractures, small though they appeared, hinted at a truth their arrogance worked desperately to conceal. Their power was fragile, built not on conviction, but on intimidation. The hostility wasn't new either. Across their career, they had targeted immigrants, women, minorities, anyone whose presence challenged the myth of their dominance. They mocked accents, belittled hardships, and dismissed experiences that did not mirror their own. For the villain, difference was a threat, and they wielded insults like shields against a world that was changing faster than their outdated worldview could comprehend. This pattern had created enemies, yes, but it had also created anticipation. Each time the villain strutted into a debate, each time they sneered across a table, there was a silent wish, whispered in homes and classrooms and break rooms. When will someone finally put them in their place? That longing wasn't just personal, it was collective. For years, people had been waiting for the moment when arrogance would meet its match. The irony was that the villain themselves helped set the trap. In their hunger for dominance, they pushed further and further, each insult sharper, each performance crueler, convinced that no one could touch them. But arrogance has a way of writing its own downfall. And on that night, under those lights, their overconfidence became their greatest weakness. They believed they had landed the perfect blow, the insult that would shatter their opponent. What they didn't realize was that the stage they had set, the silence, the tension, the attention of a nation, was now primed for something else entirely. The villain's story, in the end, was one of contradictions. Powerful, but brittle. Commanding yet insecure. Feared, but never respected. They had built their career on dominance, But dominance alone cannot withstand the quiet strength of dignity. And as they leaned back with that smirk, convinced of their victory, the audience sensed something different rising in the room. The cracks in their armor were about to split wide open, and the downfall everyone had been waiting for was closer than they realized. Long before the lights of the studio fixed on their face, long before the viral clips and headlines, the hero's story began in a place far quieter, humbler, and infinitely more human. Their childhood was not cushioned by privilege. It was shaped by struggle. They grew up in a household where every dollar was stretched, where sacrifices were routine, and where the value of hard work was not just preached but lived. Their parents instilled in them an ethic of service, reminding them that dignity was not about titles or wealth, but about how one carried oneself in the face of hardship. For the hero, nothing came easily. Education meant juggling odd jobs, helping younger siblings, and often navigating spaces where they were treated as an outsider. They knew what it felt like to have their accent mocked, their clothes judged, their very presence questioned. They knew the sting of doors closed before they even had a chance to knock, but instead of bitterness, those wounds carved resilience. They carried themselves with the quiet strength of someone who had already survived the kind of trials that arrogance could never comprehend. Their rise into public service was not accidental, it was born of necessity. They had seen injustice up close, families torn apart by discriminatory policies, communities ignored when resources were distributed, neighbors silenced when their voices were most needed. Instead of turning away, the hero leaned in. They became an advocate, a listener, a fighter who showed up not because cameras were rolling, but because people needed someone in their corner. This authenticity separated them from the villain in every possible way. While the antagonist chased headlines, the hero chased solutions. While the villain performed strength through cruelty, the hero embodied strength through empathy. Their humility wasn't weakness, it was a deeper kind of power, the kind that comes from never forgetting where you started. In community centers, town halls, and late-night kitchen table meetings, people felt it. They trusted the hero because the hero had lived their struggles, not merely spoken about them. And yet, for all their calm and humility, the hero was no stranger to fire. They had faced down mockery before, endured slander campaigns, survived the storms of political theater. Each time, they responded with grace. They learned early that arrogance thrives on reaction, on losing your composure. So they built themselves into the kind of figure who could endure insults without flinching, who could transform even an attack into a lesson. This wasn't performance, it was survival, honed over years of navigating a world that often told them they were less. What made the hero truly formidable was the duality of their story. On one hand, they represented millions whose voices had been marginalized immigrants, workers, women, people of color. On the other hand, they also embodied the very best of America's promise, that with perseverance, integrity, and courage, someone from humble beginnings could rise to a stage once reserved for the privileged few. Their presence alone was a quiet act of defiance against a system designed to keep them out. And people noticed. In classrooms where young students struggled with their own identities, they saw someone who looked like them, who had walked a similar path, standing tall against arrogance. In households where parents carried 2 or 3 jobs, they saw a reflection of their own sacrifices honored in the hero's story. To the marginalized, the hero's journey was validation. To the privileged, it was a reminder that leadership could come from places they had never bothered to look. The hero's authenticity also disarmed opponents. While others relied on rehearsed talking points, the hero spoke with raw honesty. They didn't pretend to have all the answers, but they spoke from lived experience. That honesty could not be faked, and audiences knew it. Even critics sometimes found themselves grudgingly admitting this was someone different, this was someone real. In many ways, the clash on that night was inevitable. The villain, whose life had been built on dominance and spectacle, was bound to collide with the hero, whose life had been built on struggle and dignity. Their stories were too opposite, their values too contradictory, for this not to happen. It was arrogance versus humility, cruelty versus compassion, privilege versus perseverance, and only one could emerge, with their integrity intact. What the villain miscalculated was that the hero's past had prepared them for precisely this kind of confrontation. The insults, the dismissal, The smirks, it was not new. It was the echo of every door slammed in their face, every teacher who underestimated them, every authority figure who told them they weren't enough. They had already endured these battles, quietly and without recognition, long before the cameras arrived. That is why the silence in the studio after the villain's insult did not unnerve the hero. It steadied them. For them, this was not a personal attack to shrink under it. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being underestimated, only to rise stronger each time. Their calm wasn't passivity. It was power. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had already survived worse and had emerged with dignity intact. And as they drew in that first measured breath, preparing to answer arrogance with truth, the air in the room shifted. This was not going to be just another debate moment. This was history sharpening its focus, because the hero's journey, the struggles, the sacrifices, the authenticity had led to this very instant. And it was this very history that prepared them for the moment of truth about to unfold. The silence broke with the villain's voice, sharp and cutting. Eager to seize the air again, they leaned forward, doubling down on their insult, adding layers of mockery, as though repetition would cement their dominance. Their tone dripped with condescension, as if the hero were a child to be scolded rather than an equal to be engaged. Laughter, hollow and uncomfortable, trickled from a corner of the audience, nervous chuckles from those who didn't know whether to align with cruelty or recoil from it. The hero, though, did not flinch. Their posture remained steady, eyes locked, refusing to give the satisfaction of a reaction. It was this very stillness that unnerved the villain. Accustomed to fluster, to anger, to opponents scrambling to regain footing, they found no such weakness here. And so they pressed harder. Interruptions came rapid fire. Every time the hero opened their mouth, the villain cut across them, raising their voice, gesturing theatrically as if volume could disguise insecurity. The moderators tried to intervene, voices strained, but the villain waved them off with arrogance, demanding the floor, declaring they alone had the truth. Yet, beneath the bluster, cracks began to show. The smirk that had seemed so effortless now tightened at the corners. The eyes darted more quickly, searching the room for affirmation, not finding it as easily as before. The audience shifted in their seats. What had begun as shock now edged toward discomfort. The imbalance was too obvious. One figure spewing hostility, the other absorbing it with calm restraint. Viewers at home could see it too. The social feeds lit with commentary. Why won't they let the hero speak? Why are they so afraid of their words? The villain thought they were silencing their opponent, but in reality, every interruption only amplified the dignity of the hero's composure. Finally, the hero began to speak, not rushing, not shouting, but in a measured cadence that demanded attention. And yet, as the words formed, the villain pounced again, cutting across mid-sentence, mocking the tone, twisting the meaning. They laughed, loud and forced, attempting to paint reason as weakness. The tactic was transparent, but the energy in the room made it clear. They were fighting not to win an argument, but to avoid losing control. The contrast was cinematic. On one side, chaos, interruptions, smirks, outbursts. On the other side, steadiness, a voice refusing to rise, a gaze refusing to waver, a presence refusing to diminish. The duel was no longer about facts. It was about who embodied strength in the eyes of those watching. And in that contest, the villain's aggression was beginning to look less like power and more like desperation. Every second stretched longer, the tension coiling tighter. The villain's words came faster, sloppier, each insult sharper but less effective, as if they were swinging wildly in a fight they once thought they controlled. The hero, meanwhile, let the storm pass over them, never losing composure. Even their pauses spoke louder than the villain shouting. The studio seemed to lean inward, the audience sensing that the balance of the debate was shifting. Moderators looked nervously between the two, unsure how long they could contain what was unraveling before them. On social media, the narrative was already writing itself, one side unraveling, the other unshaken. The hero's calm had become its own weapon, and the villain's arrogance was beginning to collapse under its weight. Still, the decisive moment had not yet come. The clash was only building toward the inevitable. The insults, the interruptions, the desperate need to dominate these were only preludes to the reply that would rewrite the night. But the turning point hadn't arrived yet. It was coming. The interruption slowed, if only because the villain had exhausted themselves with the sheer volume of their own noise. The air hung heavy, buzzing with the residue of arrogance. And then the hero leaned forward, hands folded, eyes steady, not with anger, not with theatrics, but with a calm that cut sharper than any insult. The silence, brief but deliberate, became its own kind of weapon. It forced the room to listen. When the hero finally spoke, the words were quiet, almost conversational. "You can shout over me, but you cannot change the truth." The simplicity of the line hit harder than a roar ever could. The audience stirred, murmurs rising, as if people were realizing they were about to witness something more than an exchange. They were about to witness a dismantling. The hero didn't rush. Every pause was intentional, every sentence measured. You've built your career on interruptions, on trying to make your noise sound like substance. But the American people know the difference. They see who offers solutions, and they see who offers only insults. The villains smirked, opening their mouth as if to cut in again. But something had shifted. The crowd was no longer with them. A low ripple of applause broke through the tension, quick but undeniable. The villain's expression faltered just slightly, but enough. The hero pressed on, their voice steady, each line building like steps toward a crescendo.
"You mock my background as though it's a weakness.
But let me remind you, I come from the same communities you ignore, from families you dismiss, from struggles you will never understand. What you call weakness is the very reason I am here, because millions of Americans live those same stories every day, and they deserve to see someone at this table who knows what it means to fight, not from privilege, but from necessity." Gasps echoed through the studio, followed by applause that grew louder this time, uncontainable. The moderators glanced at each other, sensing that order had slipped from their grasp. The villain's jaw tightened, their eyes narrowing, but their earlier bravado was slipping. The hero leaned in further, gaze locked. "You've had every advantage, every door opened, every hand extended. And yet with all your privilege, all your power, this is what you choose to do with it? To tear people down? To mock the very citizens you swore to serve? That isn't leadership. That's cowardice wrapped in arrogance." The room erupted. Cheers, claps, even whistles broke the veneer of the studio's usual restraint. The villain tried to speak, raising their voice above the noise, but it was too late. The balance had shifted. No amount of volume could reclaim what had been lost. The hero, still calm, allowed the applause to swell before continuing. Their words now carried a rhythm, a cadence that felt almost inevitable. "You think power is in the insult, but real power is in the truth. And the truth is that America is bigger than your fear, stronger than your division, and far more dignified than your arrogance." Every line struck like a hammer. The villain's face, once smug, now betrayed flickers of panic. Their hands fidgeted. They shifted in their seat. Their rehearsed expressions, smirk, laugh, sneer, no longer landed. The cameras captured it all. The unraveling of a persona crafted on dominance. The hero wasn't finished. They lowered their voice, forcing the room into stillness again. "You can insult me all you want, but when you do, understand this. You're not just insulting me. You're insulting every immigrant who works 2 jobs to give their children a future. You're insulting every woman who refuses to stay silent. You're insulting every young person who still believes America can live up to its promise. And they are listening right now. They hear you, but more importantly, they hear me." The crowd could not contain itself. Applause thundered through the studio, the kind of applause that drowns out attempts to interrupt, the kind that rolls with the energy of something larger than a single moment. The villain's attempt to interject died on their lips. For the first time, they had no words. Their face betrayed it all, the strain in their eyes, the forced tightness of their smile, the uncomfortable stillness of someone who had lost control of the narrative. And then came the line, the one destined for replay, for headlines, for history. The hero straightened their posture, voice firm, unwavering. "You don't get to decide who belongs in America. America decides, and America has already decided it belongs to all of us." The eruption was immediate. The audience leapt to its feet, a wave of applause, cheers, and even tears. Online, clips of that single line were already being shared, captions blazing. The moment of the night. The villain sat frozen, their smirk shattered, their confidence in ruins. The contrast was devastating. On one side, arrogance exposed as hollow. On the other, dignity revealed as unshakable strength. And yet, the hero did not gloat. They didn't need to. Their calm composure was victory enough. With every word, they had not only dismantled the villain's attack, they had elevated the conversation itself, pulling it away from insults and back toward truth. The room had shifted permanently. The cameras caught it. The audience felt it. Millions at home witnessed it. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a transformation. But the night was not over. What began in that studio was about to ripple outward, beyond those walls, beyond that audience, into a nation hungry for clarity, dignity, and inspiration. The hero had delivered their mic drop moment. The shockwaves were only beginning. The moment the words left the hero's lips, the studio ceased to feel like a studio. It became an epicenter. Applause still echoed when the clip began its second life. Clipped, posted, shared, and replayed across every platform imaginable. Within minutes, hashtags bloomed across timelines like wildfire. Mic drop moment. Dignity wins. America belongs to all. What had started as a confrontation under hot studio lights was already morphing into a cultural flashpoint, unfolding not in wisp, but in trending banners. On Twitter, the clip circulated with dizzying speed. Influencers reposted it with captions like, "This is how you handle arrogance with truth." Grassroots activists seized the moment, stitching together montages of the hero's words against images of rallies, immigrant families, and the American flag. Late-night hosts grabbed the footage and broadcast it with commentary dripping with approval. The villain's smirk, frozen in high definition at the very moment it faltered, became a meme within the hour, side by side with captions like, "When you realize arrogance doesn't work anymore." News outlets scrambled to rewrite their scripts. The confrontation had already upended their coverage. What was supposed to be a routine debate recap now demanded front-page treatment. Headlines carried phrases like, "The reply heard around America," and "Hero's calm shatters villain's arrogance." Even international outlets picked it up, framing it as a quintessentially American moment, one that showcased both the ugliness of division and the strength of resilience. Support flooded in. Allies from across the political spectrum, some who had once kept their distance, voiced admiration. Civil rights leaders praised the hero's composure. Community organizers lauded the way they had transformed an insult into a universal statement of belonging. Even celebrities, often cautious to step into overtly political debates, couldn't resist. One actor tweeted, "That reply, pure history. Clip it, frame it, teach it." The post racked up millions of likes in hours. Meanwhile, the villain faced a storm of criticism that even their most seasoned strategists couldn't spin away. Their supporters tried, rushing to claim bias, to insist the moment was exaggerated. But their talking points collapsed under the weight of the footage itself. Every replay showed the same unraveling. The interruptions, the mockery, the collapse when faced with dignity. Commentators who had once defended the villain's brashness began to distance themselves, their silence louder than words. What made the aftermath remarkable wasn't just the immediate explosion online, but the ripple effects across everyday conversations. In classrooms, teachers played the clip to discuss respect and composure. In workplaces, colleagues replayed the moment during lunch breaks, voices rising as they dissected each line. Families gathered around phones and laptops, some nodding through tears, others clapping as if the hero could hear them from miles away. It wasn't just political junkies who cared. It was people hungry for a reminder that truth could still triumph in a world drowning in noise. By evening, the clip had already crossed language barriers. Subtitled versions spread across TikTok and Instagram in Spanish, French, Hindi, and Arabic. In immigrant households across oceans, the words resonated. "You don't get to decide who belongs in America. America decides. And America has already decided it belongs to all of us." That line wasn't just replayed, it was etched into memory, the kind of sentence that outlives the moment that birthed it. And the villain? They appeared again, of course, defiant on cable news, insisting they had been taken out of context, accusing the media of distortion. But the more they spoke, the smaller they seemed. The smirk that once commanded rooms now looked defensive. Their arrogance had turned brittle. and the world could see it. The hero, on the other hand, did not need to chase cameras. Their words did the work for them. Every replay amplified their calm. Every meme strengthened their stature. The nation had already chosen its takeaway. Dignity had outshone arrogance. By nightfall, the moment had spread across the globe, no longer just a debate highlight, but a cultural milestone. The clip was projected onto the walls of protest gatherings, quoted in sermons, scribbled on classroom chalkboards. It was no longer just about politics. It was about identity, belonging, and the timeless power of truth spoken calmly in the face of hostility. And yet, even amid the celebrations, there lingered a deeper question. What comes after a moment like this? The answer was not yet clear. But one thing was undeniable: something had shifted, and there would be no going back. As the echoes of that night began to fade into history, something larger remained, a resonance that stretched far beyond politics, beyond party lines, beyond even the clash of two people under unforgiving lights. The moment had crystallized into a parable, a story not of sound bites but of values. And it was here, in the reflection afterward, that the true meaning revealed itself. What the nation had witnessed was not simply a rebuttal. It was a stark contrast between two forces that have always wrestled for the soul of America: arrogance against dignity, lies against truth, exclusion against belonging. The villain came armed with the language of division, confident that mockery and interruption would dominate the day. But arrogance, when stripped bare, always reveals its fragility. Dignity, though quiet, carries a force that arrogance cannot withstand. The hero had not raised their voice. They had not resorted to insult or fury. Instead, they reached for something deeper, something rooted in humanity's shared truth. Their reply reminded people that power is not in volume, but in conviction. That belonging cannot be granted or denied by the arrogant, because it is intrinsic, woven into the fabric of human worth. In homes across the country, the lesson settled in. America's promise does not belong to the loudest, the cruelest, or the most entitled. It belongs to the builders, the dreamers, the families who sacrifice for a better tomorrow. It belongs to those who endure mockery yet choose dignity. It belongs to every voice that has ever been told you don't belong, only to answer with living proof that they do. For a nation weary of noise, the hero's reply felt like a compass. It pointed back toward first principles, that truth, even when spoken softly, outlasts deception. That respect is not weakness, but strength. That a nation is not measured by who it excludes, but by how fully it embraces those who dare to call it home. And that, perhaps, was why the moment reverberated so powerfully. It wasn't just political theater, it was moral clarity. A reminder that, in the battle between cynicism and hope, humanity still has the capacity to choose hope. In the clash between arrogance and dignity, dignity can still triumph. Children watched that clip and saw not just a politician, but a model. Parents replayed it because they wanted their kids to understand this is how you face cruelty with poise, with truth, with courage. For immigrants and marginalized communities, the words were more than a comeback. They were affirmation, a declaration that they were not merely surviving in America, but shaping it, defining it, embodying its promise. Even for those outside the political fray, the reply carried weight, because everyone, at some point, faces arrogance. Everyone, at some point, is interrupted, belittled, dismissed. The lesson was universal. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need cruelty to be strong. Dignity itself is power. And so the clash became something else entirely. No longer just a debate highlight or a viral meme. It became a mirror held up to America and to the world. It asked each person watching, who do you want to be? The one who interrupts, mocks, and belittles? Or the one who stands steady, speaks truth, and reminds us of our shared humanity? In that framing, the confrontation was no longer about one villain's downfall or one hero's rise. It was about direction, about compass points, about whether America would spiral deeper into division or rediscover its capacity for belonging. And in that reply, people found not just a comeback, but a compass pointing toward a future where dignity defeats arrogance, truth outshines lies, and humanity itself becomes the standard by which we measure greatness. A future that isn't gifted by the arrogant few, but built every day, in every home by the many who refuse to let go of hope. Hero's calm reply went viral for a reason. In an age when shouting often drowns out listening, when arrogance seems louder than truth, this moment cut through. It wasn't just the words spoken, it was the clarity behind them, the courage it took to stand steady while facing mockery, and the dignity that carried more weight than any insult ever could. People didn't share the clip because it was dramatic. They shared it because it was honest. They shared it because it reminded them of what leadership should look like. And they shared it because, in those few seconds, they saw a glimpse of a better future one, where truth rises above hate, where compassion defeats cruelty, and where dignity proves stronger than arrogance. That's why this reply mattered. It was never just a comeback in a debate hall. It became a declaration that the voices too often silenced still have power, that those dismissed as outsiders still belong, and that no amount of arrogance can erase the truth of human worth. Moments like this ripple outward only when people refuse to let them fade. They grow stronger when we pass them forward, when we make sure others see them, when we remind the world that dignity deserves a platform too. So here's the call. If you believe moments like this need to be seen, if you believe dignity must be louder than arrogance, share this video. Amplify it. Be part of a movement that says truth is worth defending, compassion is worth celebrating, and hope is worth spreading. Because sometimes a single calm reply can do more than silence arrogance. It can inspire a nation, it can change the conversation, and it can point us all toward the future we deserve.